So, Chris, this is welcome to your church.
Love the church.
Yeah. I told the story the other day when I was interviewing Molly. Is Molly here? Where's Molly? She's not here yet, but your mom said she's going to come. That when I was looking at the church, I was in Dick DePatty's office, sitting there, and I saw your picture up on the wall. It still said WFAN on or something like that, and I was like, whoa, what are you doing with Chris Russo's picture on the wall? And he said, well, Chris comes to church here, and I'm like, okay, I'm coming to church here too. So,
wow, how about that?
So I want to put our conversation in context here. So this is part of our Fully Alive series, based on the glory of God as a human being fully alive, and so it's not just our spiritual lives per se, but God is immersed in the whole of our lives and all the aspects of our lives, and assuredly. In the world today, the role of sports is not to be believed. Really, it's shocking, and many people feel most fully alive when they're calling into your radio show, screaming at you because they don't agree with your assessment or something like that.
Right.
And so I just want to. I'm going to come to you as your role in all that at some point here, but I just want to start off at a very high level. I mean, the role of sports in the world to you. In God and all that stuff. I mean, you have any thoughts? I mean, does God give a hoot about the billion-dollar business of sports?
Well, I asked the Chiefs, who got very fortunate to win a Super Bowl. Sometimes God plays in the games. That's what Bill Parcells used to tell me, the head coach at the Giants, who won 2 Super Bowls. Sometimes God plays in the game. So I see, sometimes it's fate with certain teams, and sports is an escape for people. It's something to look forward to. Something to get away from the mundane aspects of life and all sports. It depends where you are, where a sport might be. I'm sure if you lived in North Carolina today, and if you follow Duke basketball, you see some things that made you alive, the way Duke won a crazy game last night. And if you live in Kansas City and you won that game last week, you're down by 10 points in the fourth quarter, and you come back and you win a game after you lost 24, after you trailed the other 2 games by lots of large margins, hadn't won in 50 years. And all of a sudden, you go out there and you win a Super Bowl. There's a little intervention. It seems like at times. Look at the Washington Nationals in baseball. I mean, the Washington Nationals in baseball had a horrendous postseason history. They hadn't won a championship in Washington since 1924. They have to play a wild card game. They're down in the 8th inning of the first wild card game to Milwaukee with a big pitcher. They come back and win the game. They beat the Dodgers in a 5-game series. They win Game 5 in L.A. They're down 3-1 in the 8th inning against Kershaw. They get home runs. They win that game. And then against Houston, they win 4 road games in the World Series. This never happened before in the history of the World Series. They win 4 road games. They win Game 7. They're down 2-0 in the top of the 7th inning. And the winning home run hits the foul pole in right field by a right-hand hitter on a pitch that historically, the guy who threw the pitch, there's only been like 4 hits on 424 pitches if he threw it on that side of the plate. You're telling me if you live in Washington, you don't think God plays in the game? So, so there is some element. Okay. There is some element of it. There really is.
Well, okay.
I think of that all the time when I watch it.
My former parish, Channing Frye, was a member of my former parish. Yeah, and Channing, out of University of Arizona, goes to the Knicks. That's Hubie Brown is the coach of the Knicks. And I said to Channing, so what was it like when he first arrived? He said, well, these guys all have a PhD in basketball, and I only have a college degree. And then I said, well, what surprised you most? He said, well, the thing that surprised me most is that Hubie Brown, who's Jewish, is saying prayers in the in the huddle at the timeout, and he's using Jesus in the prayers.
Really?
Yeah. You got any comment on that? Prayer, teams praying before games, and
my only argument
of all that.
Well, when I look at that, when you see people point to the sky after they they do something great, as you see closers in baseball, they point to the sky. Well, they never point to the sky when they give up a game-winning home run. So I don't like them pointing to the sky when they get the 3rd out of a big inning. So, I mean, that is my take on that, is that most people who do the glory to God thing, they do it after they win. They don't do it after they lose. And when you see people being interviewed after games, they give you the glory of God first, which you like, but I like to keep that out of sports because a lot of your fans may not, they for whatever the reason, they may not buy the fact that God's paying attention. Different faith and everything else. So I don't like that per se. It doesn't, Joe Burrow does that. Doesn't drive me crazy, but I'm not necessarily a fan of that. But if a person who that feels that strongly, I mean, you respect it, but I'd like to keep it out of this. I, as a fan, don't want to. I'm not ready to hear that right now. Yeah. So I don't pay it. I let it go one ear and out the other.
Yeah. Well, as you know, it's a part of social commentary about sports. I want to say a word about you. Now, we had so much fun interviewing Molly the other day. When you were on The Fan and your dad, Tony, used to call in.
Yeah, Tony Steak.
Tony, he was unbelievable. And I remember him saying things like they got to get rid of Jeter and things like that.
When he was frustrated.
Yeah. Well,
as a Yankee fan.
He was really great radio, as you and Mike were and are too. But what I'm curious about is the little piece that the Athletic.com did on you. This is a subscription magazine called theathletic.com. They did a day in the life of Chris Russo. I thought they did a great job.
They did a great job.
They did a great job, and they showed Chris at your workout place at 7 o'clock in the morning.
They followed me for 2 days. They did a good job.
Yeah, they really did. But this is how it starts. You talking into the mic. God put me on this earth to be a sports talk show host. The response is, God must have been feeling pretty frisky when creating Christopher Mad Dog Russo.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's Armand Contain, who, 60 Minutes, Ted Shaker's here. He know him well. Sometimes you just, you got a calling, is basically what it comes down to. So, sometimes if you're fortunate enough, you have a calling. And I had a calling, and I just kind of fell into it. I had a calling to be a talk show host. Matter of fact, when I started in 1982, I went to the baseball winter meetings. And the baseball winter meetings that year were in Hawaii, so that's not a bad place to go. So I went to Hawaii. I just graduated from college. I went to Hawaii. I was 22 years of age. My parents helped pay for the bill, fly to Hawaii. And I wanted to be a baseball play-by-play guy. So I wanted to be the next Vin Scully, because I thought that would be my avenue to get involved as an announcer. Well, to make a long story short, the job that I got 2 months later was with the Jacksonville Suns baseball team. And the Jacksonville Suns hired me to sell first advertising, season tickets, billboard advertising in an old minor league ballpark, and then once the season started in April, to be their announcer, to do all the games, which is what I wanted to do. Well, as it turned out, they fired me in early March. All right? I sold 5 weeks to the Jacksonville Suns, and they fired me, but this is how God works. I had run into a radio station in the course of making all these cold calls in Jacksonville, and that station I went back to the day I got fired, and they hired me as a sales guy. And the first day that I started, the sports guy left. He took the Jacksonville soccer franchise, transferred to Washington, the NASL, and he went with them.
Oh, wow.
So they had an opening. So if that doesn't tell you that, I went from a baseball play-by-play guy, get fired, I end up at a radio station to sell, and the guy leaves the first day I start, and then the next weekend I'm on the air. So if that does not tell you that God plays in the games again, I'm not sure what it does. So I ended up as a talk show host. And what it does is it tells you that I would have been I'm a better talk show host than I would have been a better play-by-play guy. I could have done the play-by-play, but I wouldn't have had the career as I had as the talk show host. So God put me in a situation where he knew that what I could do in my memory and all the things that I knew in all the sports would be better served, and the gift of the gab and all that, would be better served as a talk show host than as an announcer. So that is the way I look at, that's just one of many examples where I needed a little help, and I got it.
God's providence.
Intervention, right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, you answered the first question by going into a play-by-play of something. I was following you around your show one day,
right?
And your voice was in trouble.
I was in trouble
at this point,
right? Yep.
And you make your living talking, and you were saying to Steve, get me honey in the tea and all these things, and you were rattled by your voice, and suddenly you heard they said, okay, you're going to talk to the University of Utah football coach.
That's what it was.
And you went in and you said, okay, I'll take it in here. And I jumped in. You basically said, don't talk because it's going to be on the air. And you said, hey, coach. And you went from really being completely obsessed by your voice to saying, hey, that was some game. You got incredible defensive backs there. And I'm thinking, how do you know who the defensive backs are for University of Utah? I mean, there's a big world of sports out there, and you're responding to all this stuff all the time.
Well, remember, some of these teams, I don't know firsthand, so I will do a little work. Like a Utah. What do I know about Utah football? I mean, I know something about the team, but as far as specifics, maybe in that situation, I had a little sheet and I knew who this guy was. No sheet that day. All right.
You were obsessed with this cup of tea and how much honey was
to
in
make
it.
sure I get my throat better.
There was no sheet anywhere near it, and you had done no talk about Utah.
How about that?
And Steve said, "Hey, Chris, we got this guy. We need to fill some stuff." And you said, "Okay, I'll take it." And you walked in and you started talking.
And I
about
did the interview.
You did the interview.
Well, I think that's the first thing you got to do as a good talk show host. This is from a career standpoint. A good radio talk show host has to be able to think on his feet. So because you're doing live shows every day, something could happen where you have to think on your feet and you have to do it immediately. Now, the latest example would be like a Kobe Bryant thing. Now, that happened on a Sunday, so you had a day to prepare yourself. But, when Magic Johnson had the HIV that happened at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're on the air immediately. When a manager gets fired, something a little less drastic, but you have to respond to it immediately as a talk show host. Yeah. In television, normally you have a chance to think about what's on your mind first and prepare yourself. If you're a columnist in newspaper, you think about your thoughts, you can edit it, you can erase it, you go back and do it again. Radio guys, they can't do that. So you have to be prepared in certain scenarios where something might happen in the course of your show, whether it's something that's just, basic like a trade or, that you have to be able to respond to. And then there's other things that you have to, like when the Astros got punished. That happened at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when they had the Spygate and they had the sign stealing thing. You got to respond to that right away. You don't got time. Well, I'll give you my opinion on it at 5 o'clock. Well, you can't do that. You got to do it right then. And, there are certain scenarios where, a host has to know how to basically blend his talents. I'll give you a perfect example. 10 days ago with the Kobe thing, I did a monologue the following day, 2 Mondays ago. I was in Miami at the Super Bowl. So I had to do all football. I had to do all Kobe the first day. So I did a monologue at 3:20, then I had a list of calls. And I took the calls, and one of the calls I did not recognize. A lot of the calls you recognize, the names, was Earl from Austin. Okay? Earl from Austin. Who the heck knows who Earl from Austin is? So 20 minutes later, I take the call, and it's Earl from Austin, and within about 40 seconds, I figure out who it is. And this is a guy that waited on hold. It's Earl Campbell. And Earl Campbell is one of the top 10 running backs in the history of the NFL and one of the top 5 running backs in the history of college football. 68 years of age. He's in a wheelchair for all the collisions that he had. But he listens, and you never know who's listening. Austin, Texas. Yeah. He listens and wanted to talk about Kobe. So that is something that you have to know how to. You got to go right into an interview mode because it's Earl Campbell. You got to talk to Earl Campbell like he's something important. This is not Joe from Saddle River, New Jersey. This is Earl Campbell. So that's something you have to learn how. You have to with 35 years of experience. That's how you learn how to do it. And now Earl Campbell's my best friend. He calls the other day. I can't get rid of Earl Campbell. So there you go. That's how a talk show host does his thing.
So that's a great,
you never know. That's the good thing about being a host. You never know what's going to happen. It's live. So you have all these surprises sometimes, which is fun.
Well, I was, one of the times I was there, some guy had called up about a preseason University of Arizona hoop game where the guard had made a really boneheaded play. All he had to do was hold the ball for 2 seconds, but he threw the ball the length of the court, and some guy threw it and scored a hoop, game-winning hoop with no time left. This would have taken place in 3 hours time difference, and you looked at your producer and you said this, and some kid went like this, and before you know it, while you were talking, he pulled up the play.
So I saw the play?
Yeah, and so you were talking and you're going, oh, what a boneheaded play. It was a really, really, really funny thing.
Again, you got to be spontaneous.
I want to bring you to a serious topic. You were really rocked by Kobe's death.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I wonder if you might, it's an existential sort of thing that got in the culture. I wonder if you might just say a word about that.
Yeah, I'm a Jordan because my generation with basketball is Jordan. The younger generation, the one below me, is Kobe. And I did not know that. I didn't think along those lines. The athletes, my son, his guy is Kobe. You know, he didn't see Jordan. He saw the tail end of Kobe. Kobe's right in front of us. He's more part of the social media landscape. He's 41 years of age. He's taking his daughter to a basketball game, a youth hoop game. People can relate to that. Jordan's a little bit more aloof for the younger fan than a Kobe is. So that hit home. Plus the way he died, helicopter crash, 8 other people in the plane suddenly 2 weeks ago. I mean, it blew people away. I mean, that was an American tragedy. I mean, furthermore, he played in 2 Olympics, lived in Italy, spoke millions. Djokovic loves him, the tennis player. So there's a world element to Kobe that, Larry Bird doesn't have, per se. Or, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar doesn't have. Even Bill Russell. So Kobe is got that. So, and then you look at the how and whys with the daughter. I mean, it's a terrible story. So, when I'm on the radio at the Super Bowl, nobody wants to hear me break down Chiefs and Niners 5.5 days before the game. This is Monday. The game is the following Sunday. So I have to do all Kobe, which means calls, which means guests. So I did 7 guests in the 2 days. Now, I can't, the first day, you're not getting big guests on. It's happened 12 hours earlier, 24 hours earlier. You're not getting Pat Riley. You're not getting Phil Jackson. They're not calling you Shaquille. They're not going to call you. And they're too upset. They're going to go to their employees. Shaq's going to go on TNT and all that. Phil Jackson is going to put out a statement. So you got to figure out how to do that from a show standpoint of what to do and who to get on. So the first day I did sort of a big picture thing of people who weren't directly involved with Kobe but were in the league when he played. The second day is when I did other things. And the best meaningful spot that I have done probably in a long time is I put Gary Vitti on. Here's another way of God working in the game. Gary Vitti was a Laker trainer, 29 years. He retired the same day that Kobe did. And in that game, Kobe scored 60 points. So Vitti, I go to the Stanford Old Timers dinner every year, which is an old, they honor high school coaches. And it's in Stanford. I go because I've had a history of going. So I go. 2 years ago, Gary Vitti is from Stanford. I didn't know that. They honored him. First time I ever met him. Gary Vitti. Okay, hello, how are you? He was aware of me. In October, I go to Billy Andrade's golf tournament. Charity. Billy Andrade's a former professional golfer. He's a good friend of mine. He's done some things for me. So I went to Atlanta for the weekend. Now, do I want to go to Atlanta in a weekend to play in a charity golf day for 3 days during the base? I don't, but it was the right thing to do for Billy Andrade. So I go. Who's there? Gary Vitti. Hello, he just wrote a book. So when I needed Gary Vitti on that Monday 2 weeks ago, I could call him up. And he said, for Chris, I'll do the spot. Now, if I didn't know Gary Vitti, if I didn't run into those 2 things, charity events, there's no way I would have gotten him. So I get Gary Vitti on the Tuesday. He couldn't do it the first day. He was too broken up. And Gary Vitti comes on. I'm on 3 to 6. He comes on at 3:02, does 42 straight minutes.
Wow.
On Kobe. Now, who knows Kobe better than him? Talked about his 60-point game. I'll give you 2 stories about Kobe that was interesting. One, and this is on the air. I shut up, answer the questions, and he talks. Kobe tears his Achilles. He's on the court. This is 5 or 6 years ago. He goes on the court. Vitti knew right away what it was. Kobe says, "No, I'm all right. I just felt some blood running up." "Kobe, you just tore you." "I'm fine." Finally, 30 seconds later, Kobe realized there was a major problem. He would not go off the court until he shot those 2 free throws because he got fouled. And he didn't want Mark Jackson of Golden State to pick the free throw shooter. Because if a guy gets hurt and he gets fouled, the other coach picks who shoots the free throws. He didn't want Jackson to do that. He sank the 2 free throws. Refused to allow Vitti to walk him off the court. So he walked off the court, Vitti right next to him, went in the locker room, broke down like a baby. 15 minutes later, his wife and the 4 daughters came in, composed, wouldn't know anything happened to him. told the Lakers, I want this surgery done, let's go. Lakers said, Kobe, it's his Achilles. You got to let the blood, you can't have this. Let's get it done. My next part of my career starts now. Next morning, 10:30, had the surgery. Now, where are you getting that? Where are you getting that? You're not getting that anywhere else from him. And then he talked about, the 81-point game. He talked about him and Shaq, and he talked about the daughter, the 13-year-old. Saturday before the helicopter crash, Kobe video texted Vidi a picture of his daughter on a step-back jumper. Daughter was a hell of a player, 13 years old, and she was going to be a college player. UConn, that good. And Kobe says to Vidi, where do you think she got that step-back jumper from? From him. And so you got Vidi telling you this for 40-something minutes, and if you are listening, and you are a Chris Russo fan, you have Sirius, and you hear me on Tuesday at 3 o'clock and you're driving around, you are not turning off that radio until he's off. I don't care if you're at Walter Stewart's. I don't care if you're in your driveway. You are going to listen to that. That is compelling. And my job there is to keep my mouth shut, ask the questions, know where he's going, and let him do the answering. And I know he's going to get upset if I get too heavy, if I talk family and all the necessary as well. So I center it around basketball. I am a sports show, so I center it around basketball, Shaq and the championships and all that, which for him keeps it together. At the end of the interview, when I know the interview is coming to a close, that's when I'll bring up daughter, because if he does get upset then, he doesn't have to continue and compose himself. But those are the sort of things, and you have to make that for the audience as a talk show host. Kobe, it's an American tragedy. You have to turn it on, and you have to handle that part of your job properly. And that's where, fortunately, since I was 5 years old, I've been almost practicing doing this in my head for 55 years.
Yeah.
So when I get in that situation, I can do it.
Well, your mom told a story about you at Darrow and walking around talking into a pencil.
Yeah.
And
little microphone.
Yeah. And one of your, Allison Caesar, a member here, her son was, you lived on his floor at Darrow the first year.
Oh, did I really?
Yeah,
oh, yes,
yeah,
Pete Caesar, right.
Yeah, and he was telling me that you were sitting in the crowd of a kid hoop game, and you're starting announcing what's happening. So I want to talk about kids here for a moment. You have kids?
Yeah, 4, yeah.
Yeah, and Timmy, CYO hoop and all that sort of thing. Years ago, when I was the Kent School soccer coach, I had a kid who was a full scholarship kid to play hockey at Hobart. He was the captain of our soccer team. He started to get worse and worse, and I said, okay, listen, here's the deal. You're working too hard. You have to play the game. You can work hockey, but I want you to play soccer. Kid went on to become an All-American soccer player, quit hockey. I want you to, do you have a word for us about the working of little kids' sports? So our little kids, you and I grew up, dribbling basketballs, pretending we were on the Knicks in our backyard. Now these kids all have programs. They have programs for left-handed dribbling. What about the sort of pre-professionalization of little kids' sports?
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with the parents, too. I think a lot of parents, have visions, and I've been at 1 million AAU games, and I had 2 kids who did that and traveled all around, the East Coast, watching, and the parents think they have the next Michael Jordan on their hands. I don't see it in the other sports as much, but I'm sure the parents, I'm sure in hockey and all these sports, especially in places like this where people are very competitive, I think they get a little, they go overboard. So I think I think there's too much reward for participatory sports, where, everybody gets a prize. Well, you finished second place. I think there's too much of that too, because I think you have to teach kids, you got to win. America's about winning. I mean, it's fine to be in second place, but you can't be sad. You got to strive to win. So I think there's a little of too much in sports in some situations of, oh, he's participating and isn't this nice? Oh, we lost. Let's all get a trophy. I think that goes the other way. But I do think that and Kobe felt the same way, by the way. He hated second place stuff. And don't forget he had that academy out in California. The thing about the participate, I think you have to let your kids play sports at their own rhythm and try not to get involved as a parent. And I think you go to the games. I go through hula hoops to go to these games. You'd be amazed what I have to do to get from New York City to Darien High School for a 7 o'clock game when I'm off at 6 o'clock. I mean, it's impossible. But I do what I have to do, and I try to get to all these games. So you try to be there for them, but you try to stay out of the way and let them learn from their errors. If they're having trouble with the coach, oh, Colin, I'm not going to get involved. That's you. You know, if you have trouble with your boss, you're not going to call your father in 20 years. Dad, can you call the boss and get it straightened out? You have to learn how to work with your coach. That's what it's all about here. So I try to stay out of it on a day, and I try not to kill the officials and all those kinds of things. I'm not as good at that because I can be rough. But I try to be there, and I try to stay out of it, and I never ever comment on how he played or how the team did until he asks me. All right? Because you don't want to get him in the car or see him 20 minutes after he lost or the team lost and he played lousy and then make a comment about it, because that's not the time. He might be annoyed. He doesn't want to hear from his old man anyway. So in that situation, I try to stay away. But there will be a time if I see something I don't like, and I always watch the games on tape, that I'll see something and I'll try to direct it to both my boys who played. I'll try to direct it to, Colin, you got to dive on a loose ball. There's a loose ball there. You got to get it. Those kinds of things. But I try to stay out of it from a day in, day out basis, and I try not to take it that seriously. But I'm competitive. So when I see New Canaan and basketball and I see a bad loss, we had a terrible loss on Thursday night, I'm still bothered by it Thursday night, 3 days later. Why should I care, for crying out loud? But I'm still bothered by it. I mean, that's amazing. It still stings me that we lost the game the other night. So I try, and I use this stuff on the air. Remember, I've always done that where people want to hear from me anyway. They want to hear my personal life stuff. So I always bring things that's part of my life, whether it's a tennis match. I went to play golf this summer in St. Andrews. I took 11 guys. We had plane issues going over. We had 7 days of golf. I'd made that an hour story on Sirius, and people love that stuff because they want to identify with the host. And so when I talk about New Canaan basketball or talk about Timmy or talk about my kids, I did a big thing last year. My daughter did not get into all these colleges. Absurd. Holy Cross, Boston College. I went nuts. 3 days. I went crazy. And, she ended up at South Bend, so everything all ended up well. But bottom line is I went crazy, and you'd be amazed who heard that. I mean, every college president, they may not hear it live. They may not hear it live, but in this day and age, when you do stuff, it goes viral. And everybody hears it, so they hear snippets. They hear a highlight, and it goes on web. And so in the old days, you did sports talk. If they missed the 4 hours, that's the end of it. That show goes away. It's the next day. Now, if you do something, that you may have done 2 months ago, you'll be amazed who hears about it 3 or 4 months later. Yeah, I heard you do that. Some guy in Seattle, Washington. And you forget that in this day and age, it never ends. And there's a perfect example. But I try to make my life part of the show, and the basketball and the kids. I try to stay out of it. You see too much kid involvement, but you want your kid to play hard, to give him, play every possession importantly and go after it. And, I've been telling Colin that now the last couple of days. Colin, think Kobe in these games. Because he plays, Kobe you saw Kobe in the middle of January in Detroit, and you happen to buy 2 tickets to a meaningless game. Kobe gave you 43 minutes of everything he got. Everything. Jordan, same way. Bird, same way. The all-time greats do that. Bird, same way. Everything he got. And I try to tell my kid, Colin, when you get in that game, everything you got, think Kobe. Because he can relate to that. And he knows the block mamba and all that. He knows what that means. And then if there's a loose ball on that ground, he might die for it. And that's how I try to use sports to help the kids. It doesn't always work, and then he goes 0 for 8 from 3, and he plays 9 minutes, and I get all ticked off. But that's how I do it.
Okay. So that's hilarious. I have heard you on air. The first time I called in the show years and years ago, you said, "Hey, Peter Walsh." She goes, St. Mark's Episcopal Church, New Canaan, Connecticut. What am I, behind in my stewardship pledge?
Did I say that?
And then you said, yeah, how are we doing with the money here?
I did that too.
And right on Sirius XM.
And you did a good job. You explained the Calvinistic feeling of New England people. We don't want to let that go viral. That could be huge.
So I want to, you periodically, anytime I call, and you always identify your home church.
I have to. I did it the other day when you called.
I know. And so how do people react? I mean, when you identify yourself as a Christian at your home church, I remember the New York Times one-page piece the magazine did on you. They had 2 pictures, maybe 3 pictures. One of them was a gold cross you wear around your neck.
New York Times magazine.
The New York Times magazine. I mean, how do people react to you?
Well, you don't
glancing your faith life. You don't launch into it, but you glance it.
You glance. You can't throw. It's like the kid who threw 5 touchdowns and he spends 20 minutes telling the post game, glory to God. That can rub people. The other team may have lost, and there might be people who didn't like the fact you threw the 5 touchdowns. So I try not to go too heavy with it. I try to keep it mostly sports. There's only a couple times in my career that I've spent more time outside of sports on a development. I very rarely dabble into politics, very rarely. I did the gun with Newtown. I did a week of that. But for the most, I did Vietnam because that great Ken Burns thing. That was another great spot I had. I did a week of Burns, and if anybody saw the Vietnam thing he did a couple years ago, I put the guy on from Kansas City who went gung-ho and then came back and became an anti-war protester. Guy didn't know who I was, tracked him down, he was great on the air.
Yeah.
So you try, there are certain things you can do, and especially in dead times of the year, but for the most part, I try not to go too heavy with religion, politics, guns is a major debate, and don't forget that's a national audience.
Yeah.
So you try not to go too heavy. It is a sports show. You got a lot of kids listening. You keep the language simple. You got a lot of kids listening too. You don't want to get them, they listen into sports. So I try to do, for the most part, I try to do everything. Now, if you call, what am I supposed to say? Peter from New Canaan, I got to explain who Peter is, because next time I see Peter, he's going to get mad at me that I didn't identify him on the show.
Yes. You come for communion, I'll say, go to the other person.
Yeah, exactly. So there are certain situations where people are going to know that I'm Episcopalian, and I go to St. Mark's Church because I have him here. And my wife's Catholic, so we do lose St. A's once in a while too, because my wife's Catholic, and we go to St. A's. So there are some situations you're on 20 hours a week, and things are going to happen that you're going to have to give them some of this, but I try to stay away from it.
Okay, so I'm going to give the mic to everybody here for a moment. One last question. You're incredibly disciplined. You're up at up early. You're at the gym. You have tremendous responsibilities, and yet whenever you're in town, you come to church. I wonder if you might just. I mean, these are your people here.
Well, I'm doing a lot of the church now because my mother sings in a choir.
Yeah.
And the last thing I want to deal with if I don't go to the 10 o'clock service is, Molly Russo, where the heck are you, for crying out loud? So I went to 8 today, so if you don't see me at 10, I have an out. But I try to go. I'll try to go 3 times a month. You just feel like you want to go to church. I won't necessarily, if I'm going to the Easter or Christmas services at St. A's, I may not double duty it. I'm not going to pull you and do the 8 and the 10. I just might do the St. A's. But I try to come to church. I feel it's important. Again, God is the reason why I got all these breaks to get to where I am today. And so you want to make sure that, you feel that it's important that you sort of reward him in your own private way. But I try to, I'll be fair now. If somebody says, Chris, let's go play Wingfoot on a Sunday morning in June, I'm not coming to St. Mark's. So let's not make me, I'm not Gandhi. Let's not make me holier than that. But I try to come as much as I can.
Yeah. That's hard to follow. So anybody have a question or a thought for Chris? Jill's got a microphone in the back. Far corner, Dave Park. Dave is a Ravens fan. He's a good guy, except for that part of it, because the Ravens took the Browns. But anyway, go ahead.
Thanks, Chris. How are you?
Okay.
Quick question. I was wondering if a little bit closer.
I
was wondering if you saw Bobby Knight yesterday at Alumni Hall, and then just in the context of the church environment. What do you think that says about forgiveness?
Well, Bobby Knight was the
You
long time.
explain this
Yeah,
situation, yeah.
Bobby Knight coached Indiana forever. He won 3 championships. He's had a checkered past because he's rough. He's tough on his players, and he said some things he shouldn't have said. And Indiana eventually got rid of him after 29 years, and then he went to Texas Tech, and he had not gone back to Indiana because he's one thing about it, he's a bully, Bobby Knight. He's got a lot of great qualities, but he's a bully, and if you do that to him, he's going to take you out of his life. But they honored the 80 championship team at Indiana yesterday, and Knight showed up, and he went for the first time. Most of the Indiana fan base loves Knight. Okay, it's other folks in other parts of the country who may not be as into him. The Indiana fan loves Knight. I mean, Knight went to Indiana, and his teams they won. They won the right way. They didn't cheat. Kids graduated. Never, ever. You never heard anybody no academic. They did it the right way. Now, he was rough, killed the media, very difficult, threw chairs, killed officials, yelled and screamed. So there's a lot of things you don't like about him. But as far as running a program, he ran the program. We can't argue with it. He ran the program great, and he won 3 championships. All right, he won. And in Indiana, that's basketball. Indiana and North Carolina are the 2 states for hoops. Kentucky, 3 states. If you win 3 championships in Indiana, it goes a long way. So I blame it on him for being so stubborn and for allowing this to 20 years not going back to campus. It's stupid. But that's Knight. If you cross Knight, you're off his list forever. And now he came back. So it might tell you more about Knight than it might be about the Indiana fan base, because the Indiana fan base does like him.
Chris, good morning.
Hi there.
John Kennedy.
Hello, John. How are you, pal?
I'm great. This is, testing 1, 2.
We hear you good.
There.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. A couple of things. First of all, you had mentioned about Kobe and that day when he passed. I used to be a golf professional. I still am, but I'm retired now. And that day, obviously, they were playing at San Diego, and it was, Tiger was very close to Kobe. And that was a pretty compelling day to watch. And his caddy didn't talk to him that day until he finished about that. But a lot of people may not be aware, but Kobe actually went to Mass that morning.
Yep.
And that came out later. And you talk about faith in athletes, and I kind of agree that sometimes people take advantage of their faith and kind of market it. But a couple of things I'll mention. First of all, you talk about the fact that you don't wear your faith on your sleeve, but the way I look, you've conducted your career in a way of excellence, and I think that young people can look at that as a man of integrity. So I think you don't give yourself credit enough for having spent so much time being excellent at what you do, and children can kind of aspire to that. So in your own way, you've worn your faith in a very powerful way. So just know that. You've impacted a lot of kids in ways you don't know, and the trickle-down effect is pretty powerful. But I think that athletes also have an opportunity through the way they live their lives to impact kids. So that's my perspective.
Well, kids look up to the athletes. They look up.
Yeah.
They don't look up to the movie stars. The 15-year-old doesn't look up to Brad Pitt. He looks up to LeBron. He looks up to Tom Brady. He looks up to Mike Trout.
Right.
And so now the athlete will tell you when I sign that contract, it's not my responsibility to be a role model for 20 million American kids. But the fact of the matter is, that's the way it is. I mean, it isn't your job to be a role model, but the way we love sports so much, it kind of, that's what it's all about. So there is an element of, and I try to, a lot of kids got into broadcasting because of Mike and the Mad Dog and everything else. So I understand that element. So I always try to, when a kid calls up and says, can you do a podcast? I always do it for him because there is that element that you want to, set a good example. Mm-hmm. And I think, a lot of athletes understand that. And, a lot of athletes don't. I don't judge an athlete based on that. I'm a sports fan. So I usually judge the athlete specifically most of the time on what he does on the field.
How do you keep your relationship with coaches and athletes?
Tricky.
Because
very hard.
You've got to be pretty.
You got to be tough on them.
Yeah.
That's the hardest part of my job is the fact that I have to be rough. I'll give you a perfect example. Pat Riley. Pat Riley came to New York in 1991. The Knicks were horrendous. And Riley was a great coach here. Great. And I was always a Pat Riley fan because he obviously coached the Lakers prior to that. And I was a huge Riley fan, and Riley was great to Mike and myself on FAN. Come on at 5:05 on a day of a playoff game, came on Game 7. He liked the passion. And plus, Riley was from Schenectady, New York, and Riley gets it. He understands what a talk show host job is. So we had a great relationship. He leaves the Knicks after 4 years, and he faxes in his resignation. Okay? He handled it horrendously. Should have told the Knicks he wanted to go to Miami. He got part ownership with the team down there, but he did a horrendous job. Knicks got a first-round pick when he left. And Mike and I killed him on the air. Killed him. You know, I have not had Pat Riley on since. Can't get him on. You know, I think he'll do it one more when he retires, but he, you know, you were, in his eyes, you were disloyal to him, and so he is not going to reward you with an interview. So you have to remember, as a talk show host, if you're going to do your job right, there is no way that you cannot antagonize somebody along the way. And that somebody is going to get wind of it somehow, some way. You may not get wind of it hearing it, but somebody's going to tell them and everything else. And then if you ask that somebody over a period of time for help, you know, could you help my kid get an internship? Could you, you know, I need to buy 2 tickets for a certain event. Can you help me? You know, and then you go out there and knock them. Oh, that's a problem. That's being a hypocrite. You can't do that. So I try to stay safely removed from coaches especially, where I don't get involved. I look at them just on a professional basis. But unfortunately, over 20, 35 years of doing this, there are some people that you have a relationship with that you got to... Krzyzewski is a pretty good friend of mine. Now, there's a lot of things Krzyzewski does I can't stand. He's tough on the officials. He's hard on the media. But I will lay low on Krzyzewski because I don't want to... He's going to get wind of it, and he's been good to my kids. They gone to their camp. And so you can make an argument that I have a little agenda there, and then the listener who buys the subscription says, well, hold on now, he's not being honest with Krzyzewski because Krzyzewski is good for him. And that's the conflict you want to avoid, where you are not being honest with your audience because somebody is your friend who's a coach, and that coach needs to be criticized. Broadcasters, same thing. You know, so you have to, you try to stay independent, but it's impossible. So some ways you got to deal with it.
We got time for another question here. Just Cliff.
Yeah, Chris, maybe you can help me, or it may be Father Peter. I am questioning the existence of God. I've been praying for the last 62 years for my team to win a championship.
Whose team is that?
You'll have to guess.
Browns?
Over those 62 years, they have won a grand total of 1 playoff game.
Lions.
Thank you very much.
This is like Jeopardy. We'll take losing teams for 20.
Can you offer me... Can you offer me any hope, or I just have to keep praying? And Father Peter, if you want to answer.
Yeah, the Lions are great. You know, the Lions were a great franchise for a long time. They won 3 championships in the 50s. They beat Paul Brown, and they can't get out of their own way. I mean, think about it. The Detroit Lions, that's a huge football franchise, and they haven't won anything. They haven't done anything in 60 years. I don't know what your hope is, for goodness sakes.
Yeah.
And you have a good quarterback. I mean, and you're not winning without that, and you have a good quarterback. Poor ownership. Ownership gets in the way.
It's not true.
Well, a little
so
of that.
not true.
Oh, they're too loyal with their coaches.
Well, that may be true, but
Well, that's good ownership.
Some of their owners live in New Canaan.
I know that, Chuck.
I
I know,
love
Chuck.
those
I
people.
know.
I know. Yeah. Okay,
But it's a combination.
One last thing with Syra.
Syra from Queens. Thanks for taking my...
Long time, first time.
That's right, long time, first time. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about death and sports. I'm thinking that in some way, shape, or form, you were doing some kind of pastoral care for people who were grieving either Newtown or Kobe. And if you could just talk about that.
I'll give you another one. We had our point guard on the basketball team. He's a senior. His father, on the day of the LSU-Alabama game, big involved, goes to every game. Peter McAleer drops dead of a heart attack, 59 years of age. just like that. Was going to go to a cardiologist on Monday because he felt tightness, drops dead. Wow. And the Buchanan basketball family is a small family, so it hit home to me especially because I had just turned 60, he was 59, no history of heart disease in his family, so that hit home. So I missed Wednesday's show. It happened, the funeral was a Wednesday, died on a Saturday, funeral Wednesday over at St. A's, November 12th. So on Thursday, I had to do something on this because I know that Buchanan family is going to, if I talk about the fact that they won championship last year in Division 4, I have to do something on this. So I played the Dylan song, Shelter of a Storm. It's a famous Bob Dylan song. I played it at 5 o'clock, and I talked about Peter McAleer. Goes to all the games, knows where he lived life to the fullest, supported his kid. Kid was quiet, but, you could tell Peter's involvement, great sports fan. So I did 10 minutes on it. You got to remember, people in Kansas City don't know who Peter McAleer is, so you can't go crazy. But you do 10 minutes on it because you got to service that. You do 10 minutes on it, and lo and behold, we made sure we sent that tape to the McAleer family because, they're not going to hear that the day after the father, not going to put Chris Russo on. So you got to make sure they hear that. So we got the tape to them, and I think it helped them some. They hear their father on national radio getting sort of utilized. How you pronounce it?
Utilized.
Eulogized.
Eulogized. Yeah.
On national radio. That maybe make them feel a little better. So there is an element of being a pastor, not like him, but there is an element of that care.
Yeah, so what I feel like now is...
you have to go, it's time to... Well,
one of the shows, I can't remember, the guy was at the deck of, the radio deck there going with you, 5, 4, 3, 2, and I have to do 5, 4, 3,
I know you
2.
do, yes.
So we could obviously spend 2.5 more hours doing this with you, but we can't because these people have to go to church, and the Lord wants that to happen.
Most importantly.
Most important. I want to say thank you
Peter,
to you.
love doing it.
Yeah,
you guys do a
really
great job.
Chris. Thank you. Just fantastic. And your mom is here. Molly, would you just stand up
Molly
here?
Russo, stand up,
Molly
please, in the
Russo.
corner.
Okay, here, Molly. Yeah, here we go. Loyal mom, loyal son. God bless you.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, both of you.
Okay.
Peace, everybody.